My presentation basically is going to be on the impact to groundwater of chemicals, man-made incidents. But first of all, we have to realize that water is a renewable resource. And beginning with the energy from the sun, this resource falls on New York State in the form of precipitation. Now, most people recognize this resource in the form of lakes and rivers. But very few of us notice the vast resource that's available to us underground. But over 3 million people, over 3 million people in upstate New York use this resource every day. The resource is not spread around the state uniformly. While we can withdraw groundwater in almost any unconsolidated soil, the good yield waters come from aquifers, valley-fill aquifers. Thank you. And in New York State, we've designated these aquifers, those that are currently being used as primary aquifers, and those that are available for use as principal aquifers. Those are designated by the yellow for the primary and the pink color for the principal. And these are the aquifers that can yield high quantities of water, and they are subject to risk if improper uses occur on top of these aquifers. Now, we all expect when we open up the faucet to receive clean water that's a pleasure to drink and will not harm us. And I think that the purveyors of water in this state have done a good job of doing this. But we do have problems. We have problems with quantity and quality. The quantity problem basically occurs down in Long Island in metropolitan New York. Upstate, quantity is an intermittent problem during periods of drought, or if we allow development to grow faster than we expand our supply. Quality, on the other hand, is being impacted by many activities of man. And the principal impacts are from nitrates, synthetic organic chemicals, and chlorides. A major problem occurs with the use or the abuse of the use of solvents. We can get problems in the transport if we have accidents, the storage, or the improper use and disposal. It wasn't uncommon a few years ago to dispose of our waste solvents in open pits, or just dump them wherever was convenient. Now, when we do this, naturally, the solvents will go with the water and contaminate the groundwater. We also have a problem with leachate from landfills, especially older landfills. Now, these landfills that are unlined or do not have leachate collection systems can seriously degrade the groundwater, especially with the viewpoint of total dissolved solids, taste, some metals, and some organic compounds. It's really a problem when we place these landfills within the principal aquifers. This should not be done. We should not place landfills where there's a likelihood of widespread transport of contaminants should the landfills leak. And if the landfills are unlined or the leachate is not collected, they will leak. Probably the largest problem we have with water quality today is with the use of petroleum products. This is for a number of reasons. One, it's probably the largest use chemical in New York State. Billions of gallons are used every year. And it's used everywhere. You can find gasoline, or it's available to you just about any place in the state. And it has constituents in it that aren't too good. Benzene, toluene, xylenes. And these are the components in gasoline that we are really trying to regulate. Now, we have problems with gasoline or petroleum products when we're mining it. New York State produces quite a bit of oil and gas out in the western part of the state. It can be a problem when we develop these wells. It's also a problem when we transport it. And it's a major problem when we store it. Sometimes our handling practices are not too scientific, and we get problems like this. But our biggest problem is underground tanks. There's over 120,000 tanks in New York State of more than 1,100 gallons, and a very high percentage of these tanks leak. The fiscal year which just ended in March, we in DEC received over 11,000 reported spills, most of them impacting the groundwater. Around the house, we also have to be concerned. Most of the chemicals used by industries are also used by the homeowner. Most of the time, we don't read the label to know what we're dealing with, but they are, in many cases, toxic chemicals that, if used improperly, can severely degrade the groundwater in and around the home. A lot of times, when we're done using a product, crankcase oil, paint solvents, we just dump them on the ground. Again, we feel that the ground will filter the material and render it safe. Or, better yet, we'll degrease our sink traps or our pipes by dumping some chlorinated solvents down the trap. What we fail to recognize is that these materials probably will not biodegrade quickly in the septic tank. We put this into our leach system, and our leach system is acting as a recharge basin for the groundwater. Or we'll strip our furniture with chemical solvents, and we'll just leave the material hanging around. Another area that is of concern is pesticides. In the past, we used pesticides that were persistent, did not degrade, but we changed the formulation so that they would break down quicker and be more specific to a certain organism. Unfortunately, we found sometimes that when the pesticide entered the groundwater, it did not decompose, or it took many years to decompose. So that in the case of aldicarb, we saw the transport of this material away from the fields where they were used. And this is the general area in the state, including Long Island, where the study was conducted. It's important when we use pesticides to read the label. It's there for a purpose, and it's the law that you have to follow the instructions on the label when you use them. Another area of concern is nitrates. Now, nitrates haven't been a significant problem in municipal systems, but it has been a problem with individual wells, especially with the application of fertilizer and improper barnyard procedures, the storage of manure, so that we have self-contaminations of our drinking water in the rural area. It's really aggravated when we have high-density development and everyone's fertilizing their lawn and they have septic tanks and private wells. And this does occur. So density is a factor in many cases, where the nitrate would not be a problem if we had low density, but once we increase the density, there is a problem. Also, we seem to have the opinion in this country that if a little is good, a lot's got to be better. That's not the case. Only use what is needed to do what you want it to do. Another problem we have is the lack of knowledge about what happens in the ground. This is a very simplified version of what's occurring underground. I have it as a homogeneous area. We heard this morning that that's not the case in reality. But most of us believe that if we had this setting, we'd be protected. We're building on a hillside, and as we're told to do, we put our well uphill and our septic system downhill. But what we fail to recognize is that once we start withdrawing water from a well, we're actually creating a depression in the groundwater. And the groundwater is going to flow down that hill from the septic system into the well. So when we place our utilities on our lots, we have to take this into consideration. And in those parcels where we do not have room to put our utilities, we really have to go for centralized disposal or centralized water supply.